I'm the professor of psychology. I'm the director of the behavioral neuroscience program, and I do other stuff.
How is writing used in your classes?
Writing. Um, so for me, it's usually a different kind of writing than we teach in like rhetoric, writing and rhetoric. So in my discipline, it's less about persuasion and arguments and crafting a a beautiful sentence or a paragraph, and more about being clear and concise and making sure that you're citing all the appropriate references and stuff in order to make your case. So um, I usually have students try to write both styles. So write things that are more about the type of writing that you're doing in writing and pop. So writing reflection papers and opinions and things like that, and then getting practice reading journal articles and chapters and things that are written more like science writing, and practicing doing that. So I try to give them exposure to both to train them if they want to go off and do like graduate studies.
Do you offer any kind of assistance to students who are writing in your classes?
Like other than coming in to see me?
That
Yeah, I think most professors at St. Ed's are available to students for help on writing. So I encourage people to come in when they're working on any paper writing assignment to talk about what they're struggling with or things that they don't understand or appropriate ways to write. I try to model those things when I give the assignment out. So I talk about the kinds of citations and references that I expect, what APA format looks like. Most people in psychology get that early on in statistics and methods, but yeah, just getting used to the writing style. So I try to do that in advance, and then if people have questions, I just try to be available.
Okay, so what sort of texts do your students in your major typically read?
Well, in behavioral neuroscience, the texts are usually journals, so scientific journals and textbooks. So not a lot of literature and novels and things like that. And in psychology, I would say there's a mix of journals, but as also kind of primers and kind of layperson, more for the general public. In neuroscience, there's not a lot of non-science reading.
How would you learn to write one of these journals?
Lots and lots of practice. So like when I teach behavioral neuroscience, a big portion of the lab that I teach is reading primary articles that are related to the content that we're doing in class, and then having groups critique the articles, write responses, write their own versions of articles based on research that they do, and they do that in the methods course as well. So just getting used to seeing what it looks like, the structure. It's very different than like writing a thesis. So, kind of setting up something with an introductory idea or paragraph, and then supporting it, and then coming to some conclusion. It's similar. I mean, you write an introduction that's really a literature review, and talk about methods and results and data, which people are typically not used to writing about, and what data analysis looks like, how you write about those things. And then your kind of ideas and opinions really are reserved just for the discussion.
Explain what, as a professor, what a tenure is.
Sure. It's a little complicated here. So tenure usually is a process that faculty go through. So you have to meet certain criteria. So you have to be there's three areas that we get evaluated on: teaching, scholarship, and service. So based on student ratings and peer evaluations and things like that, our teaching gets assessed. Our scholarship, so or professional development, so what kinds of research do we do or things in our field. And then service is like serving on committees or doing university. And so you have to reach a certain level of proficiency in each one of those areas. For here it's 7 years, and then you apply to a committee of your peers and administrators, and if they grant tenure, then it typically guarantees you your position, and it promotes things like academic freedom. So I should be able to talk about something that's controversial without any kind of repercussion from the university. So it's supposed to guarantee that academic freedom and my ability to pursue things that are maybe outside of what's comfortable for people, and it protects academics from kind of career backlash. Here, and it's usually, and other places, is what's called up or out, which means if you don't get it, you have to leave. Here it's not. So here, if you don't get it, you can try again, which is nice because for some people who maybe haven't met those criteria, they get to get feedback and try again. But in other places, like where my wife works, if you don't get it, then you have to go find another job.
In order to be granted tenure, do you have to publish any of your research, or?
Yeah, it depends on your area, but and there's not a number, but you do have to be active in your scholarship. So yeah, I mean, before I got tenure, I don't know, I probably published 4 or 5 articles and did. The other things that count are like going to conferences and presenting, working with students, writing, publishing things in student journals or having students present. Those things count as well in terms of scholarship or professional development.
Can you explain the process of getting your research published?
Sure. So in our discipline, we usually have to do multiple experiments that are around a question. And then we have to have a finding that is interesting to people. So unfortunately, a lot of experiments we run end up getting null results. So or it's just not clear in terms of what's happening. So typically, if we find something that's significant, you put those experiments together in a package that is a manuscript. So you review the literature that's related to the question, see what other people have done, talk about the part of the question that you're answering with your research, and then spell out how you did it in the methodology and the results, and then talk about how that adds to the literature and how that answers the question and might lead to future research. So you write that all up in a manuscript, and you send it off to a journal that you think would be appropriate for. So there are lots of different types of journals. Some of them are specific to a field or a subdiscipline within a field. Some of them are a lot harder to get research published in than others. So you kind of have to shoot for where you think it would be appropriate. And then you send it off. They send it to reviewers that are in the field, and the reviewers write back and say whether they think that it should be published or not. And sometimes they say no, sometimes they say maybe if you change a bunch of stuff, and sometimes they say yes. So it's usually the sure but changing things. So then you revise it and resubmit it, and then it gets published in whatever the next edition of the journal is. It usually takes, depending on the journal, 6 months to a year for that whole thing, that exchange to go back and forth.
Can you think of any specific books that one who is more interested in learning about behavioral neuroscience would like to read?
So in my field, there's a couple of books that are edited volumes. There's one on cognitive neuroscience, and there's one on neuroscience that, I mean, they're big, thick volumes. I can't remember the title of it.
This book is really good by Gazzaniga. He's kind of like one of the founders of cognitive neuroscience, so people are really interested in that. And then these two books. So this is the Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, which I misquoted, by Robert Sapolsky, and The Emotional Brain by Joe Ledoux. They're kind of big names in behavioral neuroscience.
I don't know, psychology in general, I think it's good to go back to the old stuff like William James, and even, some Freud and things like that to get a sense of like where things were in the past. And lay person books that I like to give people. One is, I'm paraphrasing, Why Do Zebras Not Get Ulcers? It's written by Robert Sapolsky. So it's about how stress impacts your nervous system and how that works. And there's a couple of really good books on memory, but it depends on what you're interested in.
Is there one book or article of writing that you feel has affected you the most?
There's a group of articles written by this guy named Edward Tolman, who was kind of one of the early cognitive psychologists. So it's kind of historical, but in the 50s and 60s, people really thought, so everybody in the learning and memory era thought it was all behavioristic. So Skinner and everything is just measuring behaviors. And then this guy Tolman did some really elegant experiments showing that learning's not always measurable through behavior. So he did some very stereotypical like maze running experiments, but he showed that animals could be running a maze and learning about stuff without exhibiting the behaviors, and if you give them the right motivation, they express the behaviors. So to me, that's a great, simple, and elegant way to say we need to understand what's in the brain in order to understand behaviors like learning and memory.
Do you personally think it's important to be a good writer in your field?
Yeah, I think it's critical. You can be a brilliant scientist, and if you can't get your message out to the community that cares about it, or to the world, the broader world in general, nobody's ever going to know about it. So I've reviewed articles myself for journals, and I've seen some horrible writing. And even if the science is good, I don't recommend that it gets published because it's just written poorly. So, and I think that's true. I think if you went up and down this hall or all over campus, I think everybody would say that, whether it's the humanities or the social sciences or the natural sciences or business. I mean, if you can't write well, then nobody's going to pay attention to your stuff. So yeah, I think it's